Hello and welcome to Art Break, Mapping a Dutch Drawing. My name is Adina Adam and I'm Assistant Curator of Drawings at the J. Paul Getty Museum. Art Break is the newly launched webinar series that aims to look at works of art in the Getty's collection from new and different perspectives by asking visual artists, writers, and other creative professionals to share their thoughts and knowledge about objects. Today, we will be focusing on a single work, a drawing of a wooded landscape created by an 18th century Dutch artist called Paulus van Linder, who was specialized in topographical views. The person who will guide us through this drawing through an exercise of close looking is Jen Mazza, a New York based artist, writer, and educator. Jen, Jen teaches at Parsons School of Design and at the Pratt Institute. Often focused on visual analysis and problem solving, her teaching integrates reading, art making, collaboration, and research across a range of disciplines. Jen's artistic work frequently engages with pre existing images to develop what Walter Benjamin calls the art of citing without quotation marks. By allowing things to talk for themselves through the medium of paint, Jen attempts to gently undermine or tilt habitual structures of seeing and meaning making, drawing out what is left overlooked in our relationship to images and objects. Most recently, Jen's work was on view at the CUNY Graduate Center's James Gallery and in her solo exhibition, attending to particulars at Tibor the Night Gallery in New York City. Her work has been reviewed in the New York Times, in Hyperallergic, Art News, and Art in America. Before Jen joins us, I would like to quickly share some practical information related to today's webinar. Closed captioning has been enabled. To turn them on or off, please click on the closed captioning CC feature at the bottom toolbar. I would like to encourage all of our viewers to ask questions from Jen. They may do that throughout the entire program by using the Q&A function. And in case this talk piques your interest and you would like to learn more about Paulus von Linder and his drawing, please visit the Getty's website or contact the drawings department at drawings@getty.edu. And now let's welcome Jen Mazza.
Nice to see you. Thank you all for coming today. Thank you, Adina, so much for the introduction and for inviting me. And I want to say a special thank you to those people at the Getty working behind the scenes, Rob, Marvin, Daniela, and Greg. Thank you guys for helping set this up. I'm going to be giving a short talk today, sharing with you two works of my own in addition to this drawing by Paulus van Linder. Could we see the first slide, please? So this first image is an oil painting I made in 2019. It's approximately 2 by 3 feet. I thought to set the stage, I would pair this painting with a quote from a short story by Borges, titled Pierre Menard, author of the Quixote. For those of you who are not familiar with this story, it details the works of a fictional author named Pierre Menard, whose greatest claim to fame was his attempt to write again Miguel de Cervantes' story of Don Quixote. This is how Borges explains it. Quote, Pierre did not want to compose another Quixote. He wanted to compose the Quixote, but his goal was never a mechanical transcription of the original. He had no intention of copying it. His admirable ambition was to produce a number of pages which coincided, word for word and line for line, with those of Miguel de Cervantes. Unquote. My purpose in bringing Pierre Menard into this story is to introduce something about the way I, as an artist, engage with pre-existing works and images. I want to offer you some insight into the way I'll be looking at this particular drawing from the Getty's collection and to discuss how I engage with collections in general. My desire is not to copy so much as to make again, dragging an object or an image out of a specific historical position and repositioning it into the present. This is not such an uncommon thing for artists to do, or for people in general. After all, anytime we gaze at a historical work, we are engaging with the past as if it still pertains to us. We want it to offer us something, to reveal something. But I do this transposition quite literally. I want to return some immediacy to this relationship. To better describe my artistic process, I would explain that what emerges in my mind initially is something vague, something I want to get into view. In the case of the painting you are now seeing on the screen, what I wanted to get into view was something about the gaze, how we gaze at artworks, and how this is related to how we gaze at other people. And wrapped up in this was a question about how to get into view our accountability to others, both living and dead. The original Etruscan mirror this painting is based on is in a collection in Italy, but I encountered the image in a book at the Watson Library at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. The painting depicts the reverse side of this mirror, where two figures stand in mirroring poses. To get into view something about the gaze, my returning to some of the first mirrors ever made seems a logical maneuver. But the initial encounter was spontaneous and intuitive and brought about by my wandering around through the Met's collection. So I was excited to discover through my research that many Etruscan mirrors, such as this one, have engraved designs that depict what are called sacred conversations, conversations between mortal and immortal, between living and dead. Could we have the next slide, please? Over the last year, a new impulse has arisen, and I've been trying to get into view something about the possibility or impossibility of seeing nature. I want to ask the question, is it possible to see nature in any manner that is not purely anthropocentric? For this reason, as I walked virtually through the Getty's collection, this particular work stood out to me. It is a wooded landscape made in ink by the Dutch artist Paulus van Linder from about 1780. Strolling around a museum's collection, actually or virtually, is not such an indirect way to look at nature as it may sound. In fact, I would suggest it may be more direct, less mediated, or perhaps I should say it acknowledges its mediation. I believe that my immersion in Western culture, the photos and paintings I've looked at, and the stories I've read have served both to frame and define what is to be considered nature or a view. At the moment, it would feel inauthentic to me as an artist to claim any firsthand experience of nature. To paint plein air as I once did would feel like a bit of theater in which I, like an actor on the stage, play the role of the artist. But let's zoom in and look a little closely at this drawing. Next slide, please. I am very interested in close looking at things in the world. I paint representationally because I think we can only see what we know how to describe, and knowing how to describe clarifies in turn what we can see. The instant one tries to describe something, to trace something of the world with words or a pencil, this expression is already ordering, classifying, valuing. Perception itself is never neutral. Looking is valuing. I want to think of seeing nature as a particular form of literacy. We humans have a desire to make things comprehensible, to tame them. I sense that nature is domesticated by my glance, by my mere presence, and the activity of drawing may only compound this. I encourage you to direct your gaze towards the upper part of the tree trunk to the right. Notice the different types of lines. When I look at this drawing, I first notice the motion behind the marks. Anytime you have lines like this, it implies a confidence on the part of the artist. This is not someone who is using drawing to decipher, to learn, or to carve out form. This is someone whose brush or nib is skating along the surface of the drawing. This free play could be arrived at from a variety of sources. If you had the shadow of forms on the paper sketched in black chalk, as Van Linder did, you could move within those shapes with some ease and get the forms in the right place so that specificity is revealed. But with the additional support of an optical device, such as a camera obscura, it would be even easier. But whatever his method, the artist's hand is at play within the contours and shadows. There is not the sense of a labored looking, but instead of a pleasant facility. If you look at the foliage, you can notice how the outlines are not true to nature, but brought closer to regularity, conforming more to a mood than scientific observation. I want to say that these are oak trees, but you will see in a moment that the ground cover is treated in a similar way. Why is it that a near scribble is enough to convey to us a sense of natural disorder and variety? Next slide, please. I want to draw out a few details that are perhaps easy to overlook. First, notice the poses of the trees in relation to each other. There is a slight anthropomorphism. Notice how the trees on the left seem to draw back from the prominent and more deeply shadowed tree on the right. Next slide, please. I have circled 2 points of interest here. Notice above, hidden in the trunk, is a creature, a face and arms. And below, another face is visible, and perhaps others will reveal themselves as we look. These tree faces are nearly as visible as the human faces. Next slide, please. Do not assume the artist overlooked these figures in the trees. An artist's impulse is often to disrupt faces as they reveal themselves, knowing how prominent they can become. So we should assume Van Linder intended this anthropomorphism. I want you to also notice, creeping in along the top right of this detail, the delicate finger-like dead branches. The artist has depicted both growth and decay. I think there is a story in this drawing, and our guide points the way. This man gestures towards the natural landscape as if to offer it to us as ours. The German philosopher Theodor Adorno wrote, quote, "Times in which nature confronts man overpoweringly allow no room for natural beauty. Wherever nature was not actually mastered, the image of its untamed condition terrified," unquote. I think we can all agree that it is hard to access beauty if one is afraid. So that moment when we can at last encounter nature aesthetically as beautiful coincides with the moment of our dominion over nature. So for a moment, imagine that these small figures stand at the threshold between myth and science. An instant before the one pictured, the gnarled branches and the distorted faces in the trees might have terrified. And look at them, these 4 tiny figures. Don't they still look a little sheepish and awkward? But now as they enter the clearing, light illuminates everything, as does some new knowledge. The faces in the trees, twisted tree trunks and decayed branches, which on some dark night might have seemed sinister and frightening, are revealed to be simple vegetation. Daylight shapes our nightmares into mere matter over which we have mastery. But one should also keep in mind mastery by whom or for whom. So also consider that at the time he made this particular drawing, Van Linder had been dividing his time at least 20 years previously between being an artist and being a lumber dealer. So we should not lose track of the fact that these forests and fields are already factories. And the very act of picturing, even the term picturesque, plays its part in this domestication, this subjugation of nature to the satisfaction of human needs. Next slide, please. This is another image of my own work. It's a painting that depicts the reflective side of another Etruscan mirror. This one is in the Metz collection. It's roughly gouged with a word meaning for the dead. But rather than look at the entire painting, I want to bring us closer to the material with this detail. Next slide, please. In order to get into view something about what it means to make again. If you think of the zigzags and painterly squiggles of Van Linder's drawing, you can find there the evidence that he did not want simply to copy nature, but indeed make it again. But his sense of mastery over nature was so great that his drawing in many ways becomes an occasion to showcase his facility rather than an occasion for close looking. But this is what fascinates me about his drawing. It is not so much a record of a particular landscape and particular plants or trees, but instead embodies a way of looking at nature, a way of looking that is part of our inheritance. In my work, there is a different relationship to precision. What feels truer to the act of making again is for people not to witness my hand. Those little marks I would make to make it my own, but to witness an object through my hand. There is a divergence in my practice of copying, and a move away from privileging my own mark making. Instead, a different kind of attention emerges, and a different way of being accountable to my material. I think responsibility rests not only in what one does, but also in what one sees. For an artist, these two modes are nearly one and the same, and are made visible not merely through our activities in the world, but are also visible in the work we choose to make. Next slide, please. So to conclude, rather than suggesting I have all the answers, I want to pose a few questions to you. And my questions are the following. How do images both inform and warp our access to nature? If a drawing or painting nature counts as a domesticating or anthropocentric act, can it not also be an illuminating act? Can the hand and or the eye instead collaborate with nature? And ultimately, how can we learn to see better, and what is the role of the artwork or the artist in this process? Thank you.
Thank you so much for this fascinating and really rich interpretation, Jen. I truly enjoyed it. I have a couple of questions before we start taking questions from our audiences. And at one point you described Paulus von Linder's mark as confident. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Like what makes you think?
Certainly. That's a good question. To me, the places where it's revealed as confident is where he is really, kind of using his mark making almost in this sort of zigzaggy fashion, as if he already knows where that line is going. And he doesn't need to kind of carve it out with the sort of short strokes that someone who was searching for a form would use. But yet he gets everything in the right place. Like I feel like I can recognize if I came to this place, I think I would know it from this drawing. So that is what I think kind of reveals his confidence and his, to some extent, his sightedness in terms of looking at this natural scene.
That's really interesting because when I was looking at the drawing, I was actually quite struck by the contrast between the subject and the marks he used. So you have this idyllic depiction of a forest, but on the other hand, he uses these zigzag marks to render, the foliage, the bark of the trees, and even the roof of that little cottage in the middle ground. But my impression was that that mark, which is basically the result of one's moving their hand up and down, up and down, up and down, to me, that seemed like a very anxious and unsettling mark.
Yeah, I feel like, I almost got a pen out yesterday to kind of try to make that mark. And for me, it always seems like it would be something that would happen very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And that if it was anxious, it would go off in directions he would not want it to. But I could also see, to a certain extent, what it would be if he just kind of let his hand, sort of tremor within a space, and kind of tremble might produce a kind of similar mark also.
Right. Yeah, I guess it depends on this almost like on the speed of the mark that it's made with. Yes. And another thing I picked up on it was something that you said at the very beginning, which was something like, we know only what we can describe, and we can describe only what we know. And could you please elaborate a little bit on that? How you use drawing and painting to learn about your own environment, about your own surroundings, essentially.
Yeah, good question. I think until you try to draw something, you don't understand how much you're not noticing. that the process of drawing is about kind of correcting your attention so that you begin to see things in greater detail and depth.
Hmm.
And I think, that happens whether you're looking at, a tree or a building, or whether you're looking at a person. That and I always associate drawing and painting with a kind of, I would sort of distanced touch, so that I do think of it as for the most part, at least the way that I work, as a kind of a sort of process of love. In fact, as these things reveal themselves to me, I gain a greater intimacy with them.
Right. It seems like we have received some comments and questions. Um, there's one I'm going to read to you. I'm always fascinated by how an artist knows just where to put marks like this in the drawing. In contrast, Jen, your work you have shown here is much more controlled and stable. Can you talk about your approach when mark making and planning?
Okay, thank you. And great question. And thank you, Duff, who I'm noticing is offering this question to us. Um, I mean, at this point, because I'm interested in this sort of slow looking and slow attention, I have moved away from a lot of gestural mark making, because that to me feels like, to a certain extent, I only learn about myself through that mark. So I often want to actually slow the process down so that I'm not using my habits, like my habits of mark making. And I'm really kind of, to a certain extent, like forcing myself to engage, with some kind of opacity in terms of how something is made. Such as in this drawing, kind of imagining if I was going to remake it, how would I approach that? Like, what would be the order that I would do it in? And what kind of attention, like whether I would follow through and try to actually inhabit the gestural marks that Van Linder is making and really, to a certain extent, kind of perform them. And I would say that is probably more my focus now. But depending on what it is I am working with as far as material, it ends up looking more controlled or less controlled depending on what the raw material is.
Okay. All right. Here's another question that appears to be related to your practice. How has the lockdown and pandemic influenced your art practice, especially your attention to nature? What have you been working on this past year, and has it changed?
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Thisbe. Um, I mean, just to be very honest, I would say it's been an incredibly challenging year to make work. Because I've been an artist for a certain amount of time, I have a certain amount of trust. But I think I really feel for people who have been artists for less time, because to some extent, what happened this year really, it became a moment where meaning was in flux. And when meaning is in flux, often you don't have the distance which allows you to make something that is aesthetic. So you can either kind of perform in the moment, or you could be, to some extent, I was, somewhat petrified by it. Like literally, I, found it very hard to work. And that also, to a certain extent, I couldn't get to the studio physically because we were, closed down and my building was closed down. But one of the things in terms of sort of moving forward, one of the things that I want to account to is certain questions about what it means to, again, sort of be accountable to the dead. And, in terms of my own practice, I'm asking questions about what it would mean to make work that deals with grief directly, or in a way that is respectful, that, kind of allows something of the past year to be marked and made visible, in the best way I could. But I don't know the answer to that yet. I don't know what will come from it.
Is that what prompted you to paint these images of the Etruscan mirrors?
Those actually came before, and
Oh,
actually they were on view at the very beginning, when we basically found out that COVID had arrived in New York. So it seemed very strange that they kind of, actually really sort of touched on what exactly I was concerned with at that moment. Like they arrived at the moment where they were helping me, I think, to look at the moment I was in.
okay. There are a number of questions about von Linder's profession. Stephanie's asking, can you elaborate more on how you think von Linder's role as a timber merchant and collector of taxes of wine informed his view of nature and how he depicted it? How his role as an amateur artist informed his view on nature?
So I don't know that I can speak to Van Linder's thoughts exactly, but I can imagine myself into it. Um, I assume kind of as the sort of, the beginning, the sort of early on merchant class, that part of his ability to look at nature in terms of it as raw materials was also allowing him to see. Maybe he was seeing dollar signs, where those squiggles were, and thinking about this wood in terms of what it could be used for. But whatever the case, I do think his attention was probably made more rich by his interest in the landscape.
Right.
Does that make sense?
I think so. And we have a viewer from Switzerland who would like to know, how does the work of Paulus inspire you to start work on a new project?
Hey, thank you, Marianne. I think because one thing I've been doing is actually working on trying to approach nature in the last year during the lockdown, somewhat because maybe at the beginning all I could see was just one branch outside my window. So I was kind of thinking about how I wanted to get back to it, and sort of I was attracted to nature because I was in a totally urban situation. So I think the Van Linder has, really made me think about these works I've been doing throughout the lockdown, which are actually paintings that are based on, George Stubbs's zebra that's in the Yale Center for British Art. And looking at this type of mark making, even though, Stubbs is coming in later, has kind of helped me to sort of analyze the paintings I'm working on now.
Thank you. Do you think we have time for one more question, Jen? Or do you have time for one more
Oh,
question?
sure, absolutely.
All right. So this is from Tess, who would like to know, when you look closely at something you are going to paint, do you see abstraction and disorder beneath the surface order? Which I think is a really interesting question.
Thank you, Taz. I'm not entirely sure how to answer that question. I mean, I think I would actually suggest that I see through the abstraction to order, but that often it initially presents itself as a kind of, I guess maybe in the middle it presents itself to me as a kind of chaos. And it's only, sort of the slow process of orienting myself within what initially appears to be just random blobs and dots and squiggles, that what I'm looking at becomes the map by which I, sort of move within that object, whether it's an actual object in the world like a still life, or whether it is, a pre-existing image or an artwork. So I think maybe that answers the question. What do you think, Adina?
I, I feel like it was an unfair question. It's a really it's a great question, Tess, but it's also an extremely complex question. But I think your answer was very compelling and I think satisfying.
I think we should talk more about this, Tess.
Okay, just one last question because they keep coming in. Can you speculate about the figures my day portray von Linder and his family?
Good question. I mean, one of the things that I noticed from very close looking at this drawing is that he gave a really different kind of attention to the figures in this drawing. They have, I would say, structural chalk lines in them. That means that he was really figuring them out differently than he was figuring out the landscape. Almost as if I would assume maybe that he was sort of inserting them in. I would tend to think that they are actually people that he's encountered in this landscape. If I kind of think about sort of class relations, I think, maybe that this is a moment where he's showing what he would think of as this kind of ordinary people, sort of out for a walk, sort of looking sheepish. I like the way the young man in the back appears to be like distracted and sort of looking off in another distance at something else. So it's possible, most certainly. And I think that would be very sweet to think about this as being, him with his wife or mother and two children.
During our previous conversation, you mentioned that when you copy a painting, you often get rid of the figures in the composition. Why do you do that? And would you go about this drawing the same way?
I would be really tempted to get rid of the figures, but I also think that I would really be interested in analyzing that because I think it's very problematic. Like, the question is, why do I want to be the only one in this place? Like, why do I want to be the first person? And why, I would say, maybe initially that I would say I don't want these people there because I'm not seeing the world through them. I always think of that painting, The Wanderer on the Sea of Fog, and I think, why is that guy standing in my view? So to some extent, I might say, okay, I'm not identifying with these figures, so I should just get rid of them so that I can have the experience that van Linder seems to be leading us towards. Like, look, this is yours. But I also think that desire to have that sort of pure and immediate access to nature is something that's really problematic to us historically and may have been one of the things that has served to really have, I mean, we have infected the entire globe with our humanness and our human products. And I think that some of that desire to go where no man has gone is also something that has contributed to this.
Thank you so much. And it was fascinating to listen to you walking us through this drawing. I truly enjoyed it, as I said before. And I would like to thank everyone who joined us today for Art Break, Mapping a Dutch Drawing. And if you enjoyed it, please tune in again on May 6th. Thank you so much and have a nice afternoon. Bye.